educating our kids. It's fitting that today is World Teachers Day, and I want to say a special thank you to all the educators who give their all and ensure that our kids get the education that they need, that they deserve. In addition to the packed house of attendees joining us here in person, I want to say hello and welcome to those joining us online through the live stream. We are so pleased to have you along with us. My name is Ahmed Kasad, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies for the evening. I'm a father with children of school age, and I also have the privilege of running for a trustee in WRDSB. I want to say hello, and while the issues to be discussed here tonight are very important to me, both as a father and as a candidate for trustee, I will not be speaking on behalf of my candidate tonight, and on behalf of my campaign tonight for the evening. Like you, I'm here to learn, but I'm also here as MC to move things along so that we can all get out of here in good time. I want to say, and while the issues to be discussed here, as you'll recall from the advertisements for this event, we have many speakers this evening. I will not be speaking on behalf. Following presentations by those speakers, we will have questions and answers. And just to be clear, we won't be answering any questions between speakers. As MC, we will keep all the questions and answers together. Those who are attending in person have been given blank question forms to jot down queries as they pop into their heads. We have many speakers. Those forms will be gathered just following presentations by those speakers. We will have questions and answers. And just to be clear, we won't be answering any questions between speakers. As MC, we will keep all the questions and answers together. Those who are attending in person have been given blank question forms to jot down queries as they pop into their heads. We have many speakers. Those forms will be gathered just following presentations by those speakers. We will have questions and answers. And just to be clear, we won't be answering any questions between speakers. As MC, we will keep all the questions and answers together. Those who are attending in person have been given blank question forms to jot down queries as they pop into their heads. We have many speakers. Those forms will be gathered just following presentations by those speakers. We will have questions and answers. And just to be clear, we won't be answering any questions between speakers. As MC, we will keep all the questions and answers together. Those who are attending in person have been given blank question forms to jot down queries as they pop into their heads. We have many speakers. Those forms will be gathered just following presentations by those speakers. We will have questions and answers. And just to be clear, we won't be answering any questions between speakers. As MC, we will keep all the questions and answers together. Those who are attending in person have been given blank question forms to jot down queries as they pop into their heads. We have many speakers. Those forms will be gathered just following presentations by those speakers. We will have questions and answers. And just to be clear, we won't be answering any questions between speakers. As MC, we will keep all the questions and answers together. Those who are attending in person have been given blank question forms to jot down queries as they pop into their heads. We have many speakers. Those forms will be gathered just
stream to come on. Think about how you can tell others about what's been going on in the WRDSB, what's been going on across our province in terms of education. And, you know, apropos to really nothing, let me take a line from Saturday Night Live. Talk amongst yourselves, but when you do, be talking about who you could tell about this live stream tonight. We're going to record it, or about the problems that we're having on our board, and encourage people to do their research so that we can actually elect the trustees who are going to honor the wishes of parents and actually bring ideological neutrality back to our board. So thank you for your patience, and we'll see you soon.
Take two. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Faith FM, the Waterloo Region Chapter of FAIR, and many other community partners, I'd like to welcome you to Education at the Crossroads. This event is designed to inform parents and the public about dangerous ideas in our public schools, with the goal to protect our kids. It is very fitting that today is World Teachers' Day, and I want to say a special thank you to all the teachers who do their all to make sure our kids get the education they deserve. In addition to the packed house of attendees joining us here in person, I want to say hello and welcome to those joining us online through the live stream. We're so pleased to have you all along with us. My name is Ahmed Kassad, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies for the evening. I'm a father with children of school age, as well as having the privilege of running for a trustee in the WRDSB. And while the issues discussed here tonight are very important to me, both as a father and as a candidate for trustee, I will not be speaking on behalf of my campaign tonight. Like you, I'm here to learn. But I'm also here as MC to move things along so we can all get home in good time. As you will recall from the advertisements of this event, we have a few speakers this evening. Following presentations by those speakers, we'll have time for questions and answers. And just to be clear, we won't be answering questions between speakers. We will keep all the questions and answers to the end. Those who are attending in person have been given a blank question form to jot down queries as they pop into their heads. The forms will be gathered just prior to the question and answer portion of our event. When you fill out those forms, please be sure to write out your question in your best penmanship. And if you can, as well, note somewhere on the page the name of the speaker your question is directed to. Now that our housekeeping details are out of the way, I'm ready to introduce our first speaker of the evening. We are joined this evening by Dr. David Millard Haskell. David is a tenured professor and researcher in the area of social and cultural trends. He's here tonight representing the Waterloo Region Chapter of FAIR, the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. Using his expertise in the area of social science, David will be debunking the claims of critical race theory, anti-racism instruction, and white privilege lessons with facts and evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podium Dr. David Millard Haskell.
Oh, thank you very much. And good evening, everyone. I guess you just heard that tonight my presentation will focus fairly heavily on research. And now research, when it's credible, lets us predict outcomes. Research says that this problem can be solved by this method. No doubt you're familiar with that kind of approach. One time or another, all of us have been to the doctor when we've been sick. Maybe we're told by the doctor that if we take a particular medication, we'll be getting better. We're promised that if you do this, you'll get better. But you know, the history of medicine is littered with examples where the research justifying the use of a particular treatment was not credible. Well, how does that happen? Typically, that kind of fraud is perpetrated because the people doing the research, they ignore or they suppress any findings that contradict their desired conclusion. In some cases, the research wasn't even done. They simply make claims about the benefits of the product. And as I say, we could choose from thousands of examples of scholars or doctors promising that some treatment would make things better, when in fact it made things worse. But the biggest case of medical fraud ever was over a decade ago. And the drug company Pfizer was found guilty of lying about the safety of several of its most popular drugs. Pfizer said it had done the research, and the research had proved that their treatments would make things better. But that, in fact, was a lie. Court findings that were released in 2009 by the U.S. Department of Justice showed that Pfizer had omitted or suppressed evidence. Sometimes they just made things up. They even paid kickbacks to healthcare providers to prescribe the drugs that were faulty. Now, in the face of this massive lie, Pfizer was forced to pay $2.3 billion in fines. It was the largest fine that was ever paid by a drug company. You're saying, why is he telling us about this? It's because this story is instructive. It shows us that with enough political power and enough money, you can make a lie look like the truth, at least for a little while. But tonight is not about past fraud. It's about harmful fraud now in the present. I'll let you know, it's not just drug companies who promise a new way to make things better that actually makes things worse. Your education system is doing that to your kids. It's not just drug companies who suppress evidence to make things up, to trick people, to get them to do what they want. Your education system is doing that to your kids. And it's not just drug companies who offer payouts to professionals to push their faulty methods. Your education system is doing that, and it's your kids who are paying the price. In schools across the province, and in particular, the schools of our own Waterloo region, there are two separate but equally fraudulent and harmful treatments. For now, I'm going to call them treatments, being prescribed to our students. The first treatment is radical gender ideology. The second treatment is critical race theory. Now, regarding the first, in Ontario, aspects of radical gender ideology are being taught to children as young as kindergarten. Parents are told this treatment, this new type of instruction, is needed because our schools are sick. They're sick with intolerance for the LGBT community. And they're also sick with outdated ideas about sexual activity, and outdated ideas about family, and outdated ideas about men and women. We're told our schools are sick in these areas, and we're told that instruction in radical gender ideology is the cure. Let me give some local examples. Here in the Waterloo Board, administering the cure of radical gender ideology has meant that we've paid for drag queens to come and speak to students about academic success. It's meant some trustees will promote breast binding workshops at the public library, encouraging young girls to attend. It's meant that our director of education, in his public messages, replaces the word woman with the term people who menstruate. Of course, it's not just my local school board where this cure runs rampant. In other boards, the cure of radical gender ideology has meant that students get to see massively grotesque prosthetic breasts on their classroom teacher. And if the students or the parents complain about this distraction and indecency, well, the cure of radical gender ideology insists that they be shut down. Now, I'll stop there on gender ideology because we have someone here tonight who's better able to speak to the issue of radical gender ideology in our schools. Therefore, I'm going to leave that discussion to Carolyn Burjoski, who will be speaking soon after me. For my part, I'm now going to focus on the second treatment being prescribed to our students. The second treatment, that is the second new type of instruction being forced on your kids, is critical race theory. But I'll let you know, our educators are now worried about using that term because it has been so thoroughly exposed as harmful. In fact, in my local board, Waterloo Region, and in many others, the term critical race theory, or CRT, has been replaced. It's been repackaged and presented as anti-racism education. But the two are one and the same. If you hear anti-racism instruction, it is critical race theory. Okay, a moment ago I explained radical gender ideology is justified by its supporters as a cure for a sickness in our schools. Well, critical race theory and anti-racism education is justified in the same way. Supporters say that our schools are sick with deep, pervasive racism, and CRT is the only cure. Now, we have to question that justification. How is it that schools are sick with deep, pervasive racism at a time when across North America, the large-scale empirical data shows racism has never been less of a problem? Survey data here in Canada from Angus Reid and Ipsos polling shows the lowest levels of racist sentiment in the general population ever. And it's equally true in the United States. Here's a graph created by the Dean of Social Science at Harvard University. His research is in race, on race. In a survey of white Americans, he asked questions like, would you mind if a person of color lived next door or married your child? And what his evidence shows, and you can see it for yourself in the graph that he created, racist sentiment among whites in the U.S. has never been lower, and it continues to drop. Now, I don't want you to misinterpret what I'm saying. I'm not saying that racism isn't real. Racism is real. And I can add to that. It's real, and it does real harm. But as I'm going to show you tonight, the claims our school leaders are making and what they're prescribing in our classrooms is overwhelmingly incorrect. The treatment they're proposing certainly doesn't solve racism, but it does make it worse. Now, in saying that, I'm actually getting ahead of myself. So let me outline the plan of my talk. I'm going to quickly explain what critical race theory is and how it's presented as anti-racism education. Then I'm going to show you how CRT and anti-racism instruction has penetrated all aspects of our Waterloo Region School Board along with other school boards in our province. Finally, I'm going to show you what the best research, the research that our school boards have tried to suppress, reveals about that kind of instruction. So I mentioned that critical race theory has been receiving a lot of bad press because parents across North America see that it is destroying their schools. Parents in Canada are just now waking up. But for almost 2 years, moms and dads in the United States have been speaking out. And the reaction of those parents has been so loud and severe, CRT instruction is now illegal in over 35 states. Banned in 35 states. So it makes you wonder, what do those parents know that you're not being told? Well, first off, critical race theory is actually not a theory at all, since a theory is supposed to be based on solid empirical evidence. Instead, it's more like a religion or a worldview, because in fact, CRT makes particular claims that they say are true. And the CRT claims they have a Marxist flavor, because in fact, CRT evolved out of Marxist ideology. In particular, the Marxist notion that society is divided into oppressors and the oppressed is taken up by CRT. But rather than applying those labels of oppressor and the oppressed according to, I guess what we'd call the original Marxist model of capitalists versus the good guy workers, with CRT, the labels of oppressor and oppressed are applied according to racial status. Specifically, whites are the oppressors and everybody else is oppressed. Also, borrowing from Marxism, critical race theory loves to change the meaning of words. It's done because they want to manipulate the public. They want you to hear a particular word and think a particular thing, but they're actually, it's like the magician who says, look over here, but not over here. It's misdirection. I'm going to give you an example. Here's the first example of how CRT redefines the term racism. For most of us, when someone is actually a racist, well, we'd hear that person say something about one group being superior and another being inferior, and it would be based on skin color. But now, according to CRT, racism is not just discovered through negative words and actions. Racism is primarily discovered anytime there is a difference in outcomes. Specifically, anytime people of color have a worse outcome than whites, CRT announces that's proof of racism. All other factors are ignored. If there is a difference and the outcome is worse, for people of color, they say racism is the explanation. Really? You see, it gets confusing because their model only works one way. Here's what I mean. 75% of NBA players are black and 25% are white. Now that's a big deficit when it comes to NBA players who are white. But according to critical race theory, that kind of difference isn't racist. It's not evidence of racism. And of course, I would agree, you would agree. No, it isn't evidence of racism. Fewer whites in the NBA is not evidence of racism because clearly other factors besides racism explain the difference. But as soon as you get to those other factors, that's when the CRT true believers will stop listening. But I'm grateful. I'm grateful tonight to those listening via the live stream. I'm grateful to our packed house this evening because you are listening. And I want to tell you what the best empirical evidence shows about race and differences in outcomes. The short answer is this. In Canada and in the West generally, differences in socioeconomic outcomes are not driven by race. There are hundreds of studies I could cite. I'll give just one. In one of the largest and most recent studies of its kind, the British government pulled together top academics to study the effect that race has on education and income. It was just March last year, the report came out from the UK Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, and it concluded, quote, "The evidence shows that geography, family influence, socioeconomic background, culture, and religion have more significant impact on life chances than the existence of racism." So the actual evidence shows that many other factors, and not racism, are responsible for the differences we see in outcomes. Now, I have one more thing to explain about CRT and how it seeks to corrupt the meaning of words. In the same way that CRT corrupts the definition of racism, it also corrupts the definition of discrimination. Now, if you're my age, like me, you were taught any discrimination based on skin color is bad. It's a terrible thing. When Martin Luther King said that people should be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin, we took that as truth. But CRT rejects that truth. According to the main doctrines of CRT, discrimination based on skin color is to be encouraged sometimes. The idea appears in all their materials, but it's especially highlighted in the anti-racism instruction materials. Now, I know it can get confusing, but keep in mind that anti-racism instruction is CRT. It's just how the theory is packaged for students and the average person. So how does anti-racism instruction teach kids about discrimination? I want you to hear it from the horse's mouth. The top-selling instruction manual on the topic is the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. It's by Professor Ibram X. Kendi. Kendi completely rejects the idea of treating all people equally. Instead, he insists that to make society equitable, whites have to be denied equal treatment, and only they should be made to pay for historical misdeeds. He says, and this is a quote, "The only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination." And all I can think is, what happened to do unto others? So, with that, I've briefed you on CRT and its public face, the public face known as anti-racism instruction. There's one more concept I want to explain, and it's white privilege. I know you may be familiar, so I'll try to go through this quickly. This all fits together, by the way, because the key elements of anti-racism instruction, one of the key elements is repeated lessons about white privilege. And during these lessons on white privilege, students are told that if they're white, the successes they experience are not primarily achieved through personal effort, but are bestowed on them because of their skin color. Conversely, students of color are taught, despite personal effort, their chances of success are significantly diminished because society as a whole is systematically racist and has turned against them. Now, can you imagine the psychological damage done to a student of color when teachers repeatedly tell them that in large measure, their destiny is not in their own hands? So is it true? Is it true that people of color are held back in Canada? No. Research shows that students of color, especially those who are taught to believe that the world is not stacked against them and taught to believe that their personal actions drive their success, they will succeed fabulously. Year after year, Statistics Canada shows that Canadians of South and East Asian heritage, as well as those of several other non-white ethnic groups, achieve higher income and much higher educational attainment than whites in Canada. This is so contrary to the CRT narrative. We should not be surprised that white privilege lessons purposely avoid mentioning any of these facts. I've got one last thing to say about white privilege lessons. It's about unconscious bias. White privilege instruction seeks to convince white students that even if you hold no conscious animosity toward non-whites, unconsciously you embody racist tendencies. And those unconscious racist tendencies mean you can never escape your role as oppressor. And while you'll always be an oppressor, white students are told you can lessen your oppressiveness if you purposely give up opportunities. Giving up opportunities, allowing yourself to be passed over because of your skin color. It's given the positive euphemism, checking your privilege. All I can think is, when did being forced to the back of the bus become a good thing? Anyway, like most of the claims made in the name of critical race theory, the notion that you are unconsciously racist when your words and actions are not, that has been completely debunked. But just because it's not true doesn't mean that it's not being taught to your children. And on that note, you'll recall at the start that I promised I would briefly discuss how this divisive and faulty pedagogy has penetrated our school boards and classrooms. I'll now share a few examples. Just this summer, in mid-July, the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario began distributing to teachers pre-made lesson plans on the topic of white privilege. With the help of this pre-made curriculum, about 90,000 elementary school teachers have been told to incorporate the ideas of CRT, anti-racism instruction, and white privilege into every subject that they can. Many teachers, to avoid getting into trouble, will oblige. Of course, many others are true believers, and they're simply more than willing. And I can tell you in Waterloo Region, it feels like the teachers who are the true believers are slowly becoming the majority. And I'm basing that on the complaints from parents. As the chapter leader of FAIR, Waterloo Region, I hear many stories about lessons that pit one student against another, and it's all based on skin color. And what I'm hearing is peanuts compared to the complaints and concerns that Cindy Watson and Mike Ramsey have received from parents with kids in the WRDSB. If the names don't sound familiar, Cindy Watson and Mike Ramsey are the only trustees currently on the WRDSB who are willing to listen and to act on the concerns of parents about these kinds of issues. Both Mike and Cindy are long-time trustees, and as I said, they're known for their willingness to reject the radical ideologies in the classroom, and they're willing to stand up for parents. Well, they found that in the last year, complaints about divisive instruction has skyrocketed. In public statements made in local media, both Mike and Cindy explained that they've been hearing from hundreds of concerned parents. The parents are relaying stories of their children being taught discriminatory concepts that appear to be rooted in critical race theory. To address this outpouring of concern from parents, Mike and Cindy, as trustees, brought forward a motion. They did what they were supposed to do. As requested, they requested that school board staff research the issue and provide a detailed account of what students are being taught. In particular, their motion asked that staff would answer some specific questions related to how critical race theory was influencing instruction. And it especially wanted clarification about what was being taught about the concept of white privilege. Mike Ramsey wasn't able to be at that board meeting where the motion was proposed because just the week before, 6 of the other Waterloo trustees voted to kick him out from future meetings. Now, I don't have time to go into the undemocratic injustice that Mike has been subjected to. So if you don't know the full story on Mike, I implore you to read the local news stories about his removal as trustee, and you'll see that Mike, like others, have paid a heavy price trying to blow the whistle on the radical agenda promoted by many of the trustees and other leaders of the WRDSB. So back to our story. Mike wasn't there, but Cindy was able to present her motion on the CRT issue. The motion, calling for details and transparency about CRT in the classroom, was quickly defeated. The majority of the Waterloo trustees were absolutely against parents or anyone knowing what was being taught about white privilege and anti-racism. The hostility against openness and transparency was so great that the opposing trustees verbally attacked their colleague, Cindy Watson, for daring to represent her constituents. One colleague suggested that bringing forth the motion had done harm. She said, quote, "I would suspect that our staff, our students, and families have had to deal with hate and racism as a result of this motion." Seriously? Asking a question about curriculum was equivalent to hate and racism? But the most negatively affected by this particular motion was the director of education, G. Wanchanika. The introduction of the motion caused him to weep openly. Before he broke down during the board meeting, he'd taken to social media. He was explaining why he didn't want critical race theory lesson plans being made available to parents. He said just the act of discussing the motion, never mind revealing what gets taught, was making children in the board suicidal. Do we really believe that children were watching the board meetings online and were feeling suicidal because their parents might get to see lesson plans? Well, we don't know that, but we do know this for sure. Using the potential suicide of a child to coerce parents into silence is an outrageous abuse of power. And here's what else we know. Our director of education never provided any evidence for his claim. And this is some heavy-handed activity. So we have to ask, why would certain trustees in our school board and even the director of education resort to what looks like emotional blackmail, all in the name of shutting down discussion? Why were the majority of these trustees so determined to make sure that parents wouldn't know what their kids were being taught in the name of anti-racism education? Well, we can make a pretty good guess. These bullies of the school board don't want parents to know what's really taught, because when they find out, parents are horrified and they scream for change. If you have any doubt, look what just happened down the road in the Hamilton Wentworth School Board. Just a few weeks ago, in mid-September, the Hamilton Wentworth Board sent out a survey to parents of students in their schools. The survey asked them for their thoughts on the board's new anti-racism policy. It was explained that getting their thoughts was important because the ideas and content of that policy would go on to inform the anti-racist instruction in the classroom. Well, the strong majority of parents were shocked at what they read, and they rejected it outright. In fact, here's what the board's own report concluded about parental reaction. 2/3 of survey participants were opposed to the implementation of the anti-racism policy and the ideas it promoted. According to the report, parents specifically condemned the policy, saying, "I am against this policy because it encourages discrimination when all children are the same and should be treated the same. I am against this policy because school boards should be focused on teaching academics, not this. I am against this policy because it perpetuates racism by making it the focus of everything, and it treats black people as if they were not self-sufficient. I'm against this policy because it doesn't mention anything about racism against whites. I am against this policy because it will divide instead of unite. So that's what parents had to say when they saw what CRT stands for. I'd like to tell you that the trustees and the Hamilton board listened to the voices of this strong majority of parents, but you know they didn't. Despite the outcry, that anti-racism policy and the instruction that will flow from it is going ahead. Now, I know you're not surprised that the board officials didn't listen, because you're beginning to see a pattern here. The pattern is that most of our school boards have been hijacked by activists. They're promoting their own radical ideologies, and they have no regard for parents' wishes or empirical evidence. And to drive that point home, let me give you one last example. It's from my own Waterloo board, the WRDSB. This example is a little bit more personal for me because it involves a presentation that I gave. I appeared before my local trustees in June at the last board meeting. It was just prior to summer. By way of context, my presentation before the board took place after Cindy Watson's CRT motion, after it was shut down. And let's remember, when the majority of the trustees shot down that motion, their goal was to suppress the information about CRT. So I made it my mission to do the research that they said should not be done, and I presented it to them. And the conclusions were damning. Quoting peer-reviewed studies, one after another, I showed that instruction based in critical race theory, including anti-racist instruction, does not do what it promises. It promises it's a treatment for the problem of racism, that it'll make the problem better, and that simply is not true. I showed there's no evidence that it does any good. In fact, there is absolutely no evidence that it makes people less racist. On the other hand, the research does show it can cause people to be more racist. And the research is clear. It absolutely does harm. Now, I'm just giving you a summary now. I'm not quoting the actual journal articles or the authors, because you can look up that yourself. If you want to hear the details, the recording of my full presentation before the board is available on my YouTube channel. And if you do find the time to watch, you will hear all that my local trustees heard, and you will see that they did nothing. It's true. I've gotten nowhere with trustees. Others have gotten nowhere with their school boards. But I'll tell you, it did make a little bit of an impact on social media. My presentation did get the attention of a few teachers. There were some who expressed gratitude. They said, thank you. Thank you for doing the research that our board refused to do. But there were other teachers who condemned me for providing the research that I did. In their eyes, only activists who are promoting more anti-racism education deserve to be heard. Now, I want you to take a look. Take a look at this actual social media post. This is a high school English teacher in the Waterloo board. And I want you to see this social media post that she directed at me so that you can witness how critical race theory scrambles someone's brain. This woman, in full view of the public, where anyone could read it, tells me that the research I just shared with the trustees was not valid because the scholars who did the study were white. This woman, who has direct influence over high school students, thinks it is perfectly legitimate to proclaim you should not be allowed to put forth your ideas, that in fact your ideas are a load of crap if you are white. Now, this is a textbook example of real racism, and this teacher is oblivious. And she's white. She says, you shouldn't pay attention to white scholars. Knock, knock. But this is how anti-racism instruction scrambles your brain. It'd be funny if it wasn't so horrifying. This woman who would condemn someone because of the color of skin is the embodiment of anti-racism instruction, and she's teaching your children. And there are thousands like her. Okay, I started this talk with a story about fraudulent medicines. A drug company promised a new way to make things better, and they made things worse. Finally, a day of reckoning came along with the biggest fine in the history of fraud. Well, let's make the connection. The medicine our school boards are prescribing today to cure the sickness of racism is fraudulent and faulty as the drugs of those of the past, and it's just as harmful. We need to see another day of reckoning, and it can begin October 24th in our municipal elections. We all need to vote for school board trustees who will treat all students with fairness and respect, honor the wishes of parents, and finally, please God, put evidence over ideology. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Haskell, for this incredibly interesting presentation. You've given us a lot to consider and think about, and I'm looking forward to the questions that will arise from the information and research you've just shared with us. Dr. Haskell, if you could just stay up here for a moment. Thank you. We've now come to our second speaker of the evening, but sadly, there has been a slight change of plans. Those who have seen the promotion material for tonight know that Mike Ramsey, a longtime trustee serving in WRDSB, was slated to appear. As many of you may know, Mike currently has a court action against the board related to the quashing of his charter rights and related to the frivolous and vexatious use of procedures to unjustly censor and punish him. Because of his ongoing struggle with the majority of trustees currently serving on the board, he has been advised by his legal counsel to abstain from making this public appearance. It's not that he intended to say anything that would be unethical, unlawful, or untrue. Just the opposite. However, as he has discovered, the correctness of his statements have not been protection against further actions from his opponents. Mike wants you to know that his silencing is only temporary, as his court case weaves its way to conclusion. And in the meantime, he has sent a statement to be read here tonight. I'm going to ask David Haskell, our previous speaker, to read the statement from Mike Ramsey. Thank you, Dr. Haskell.
This is the statement from Mike Ramsey. Good evening, friends and neighbors in attendance and all those who are watching the live stream. I wanted to attend part in this evening's event as I believe that it is very important for the public to become informed about what is going on at the WRDSB. But based on legal advice that I have received, I could, by simply showing up and sharing factual information, expose myself to another frivolous and vexatious legal challenge that I would be compelled to defend at steep legal cost that would be borne by me. For me to continue my work to redirect the focus of the board to student learning and achievement, and to continue my fight for parents, students, and staff in the future, I can't risk speaking right now. For all that you have seen and heard so far in the WRDSB, I will continue to ring the alarm bell. I want to continue the fight against indoctrinating kids to adopt divisive concepts. I want to continue to promote educating kids about important historical events in an unbiased manner and without teachers imposing their own personal beliefs. I could go on, but I won't. I'll say thank you for attending. And remember, change can come if each person attending and each person viewing can contact and convince 5 of their friends, who in turn will convince 5 other friends to come out and vote for change on October 24th. Thank you, Mike Ramsey.
Thank you, Dr. Haskell. You can now relax. We will now hear from our final speaker of the evening, Carolyn Burjoski. Carolyn was an ESL teacher with the Waterloo Region District School Board for more than 20 years. On January 17, 2022, she was registered as a delegation to the Board of Trustees meeting and allotted 10 minutes to speak. During her presentation, she read excerpts from 2 children's books available in WRDSB elementary school libraries and criticized the age appropriateness of the sexual content. Less than 4 minutes into her presentation, the board chair claimed that she had violated the Human Rights Code and ejected her from the meeting. The board quickly removed the video from the website so people could not hear for themselves what Carolyn had to say. Before Carolyn speaks tonight, she would like everyone to see her 4-minute presentation back in January so the community can see what really happened. Let's roll that video, please.
Share.
Go ahead.
So if you can just reset that, and I just need to grab what I'm saying. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, and you can see my white screen there with the presentation and the date?
I can see your white screen, and your 10 minutes starts now.
All right. Good evening, Director Chanaka, senior leaders, and valued trustees of WRDSB. My name is Carolyn Burjoski, and I've been teaching English to new Canadians in this school board for over 20 years. Like most teachers, I focus on my own classroom, and I don't pay close attention to what's happening at the Ed Center. However, I'm becoming increasingly concerned with the decisions that are being made at this level, and that's what brings me here tonight. A recent Record article reported on the school board's intent to cull both the libraries and teachers' personal collections of books deemed harmful. This culling was already underway at the time the article was written, yet the board could not answer the reporter's request for the criteria being used, nor how the team was chosen. No information was shared with teachers about the philosophy by which our personal collections would be judged. In the same article, a senior leader said he was proud of the new diverse books that the board had already purchased. On November 8th, we received a memo in which the board listed criteria for removing books. For example, a book that is misleading might be removed. Well, that sounds perfectly reasonable. A case could be made that some of your new diverse materials are indeed misleading. We teachers received a long list of books and resources for Transgender Awareness Week. Some of these books are a positive addition because they show diverse families and represent a variety of ethnicities. However, I am very concerned that some of the resources in our elementary school libraries are inappropriate for young children. The resources that I am now showing are all in K-6 libraries. In the book Rick by Alex Gino, a boy named Jeff keeps talking to Rick about naked girls. Rick is confused because he doesn't think about naked girls, so he wonders if something's wrong with him. Rick gets invited to the school's Rainbow Club, and he ends up declaring an asexual identity. While reading this book, I was thinking, maybe Rick doesn't have sexual feelings yet because he is a child. It concerns me that this book leaves young boys wondering if there is something wrong with them if they aren't thinking about naked girls all the time. Well, so what message does this book send to young girls who might be in grade 3, 4? They are children. Let them grow up in their own time and stop pressuring them to be sexual so soon. In fact, some of the books filling our libraries make it seem simple or even cool to take puberty blockers and opposite sex hormones. The Other Boy by M.G. Hennessy.
Ms. Burjoski, I'm just getting a little concerned that your content may be problematic. I'm not sure exactly where you're headed, but I would caution you to make sure that you are not saying anything that would violate the Human Rights Code.
Oh, I'm not saying anything that would,
I'm
violate.
just concerned, so please continue. That will not count against your time.
I hope that that I can be heard, because these are misleading books, and I'd like to tell you why. The other book by M.G. Hennessy chronicles the medical transition of Shane, who was born female and now identifies as a boy. Shane takes puberty blockers and is now excited to start testosterone. The doctor states that this hormone mixture will leave Shane infertile in the future. Shane's response is, "It's cool," a very typical adolescent response. This book is misleading because it does not take into account how Shane might feel later in life about being infertile. This book makes very serious medical interventions seem like an easy cure for emotional and social distress. And
Okay.
remember,
So I'm going to have to
Point of order. Point of order.
I'm going to point out that the Ontario Human Rights Code
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Carolyn Burjoski to the podium.
Thank you. I felt really calm until I watched that. I'm triggered. Hope I can finish this. I wanted everyone to see that. I don't know what our live stream is like right now, Joe, but I wanted people, it's good, he says. He's giving me the thumbs up. I want to get that message out. That video was about me. It got buried. And I was treated horribly in the week that followed. And nobody could see what I actually said. And I have a right for people to know what I actually said. So that's where I wanted to start. So before I get into my formal remarks, I want to show this little magnet I got. I had the opportunity to be in Memphis with my best friend back there. Woo! And we spent a morning at the Civil Rights Museum, and that was really poignant and memorable. I got a fridge magnet in the gift shop afterwards, but because this really spoke to me after my ordeal. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. What I've been through has been hard, but hard things bring other things, and it's a journey, and I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. I just wanted to welcome the live stream people, and I particularly wanted to welcome the people who came from the Waterloo Masjid. I spoke to Sheikh Abdul Manan Sayed Nadwi today. We had a great conversation about the Muslim community being concerned about these books that I'm about to talk to about, and thank you for coming tonight. I'm motivated out of concern for children. I couldn't not speak. I couldn't not speak on January 17th, and I couldn't not speak tonight, even though my lawyers told me not to. So, here I go. Thank you. Imagine that you have an 11-year-old daughter named Emma. She's a grade 6 student at your local elementary school. For the most part, Emma seems like a happy kid. Unbeknownst to you, though, some kids at school have been showing Emma YouTube videos about teenage girls who now identify as boys. By taking testosterone, their voices deepened and they were able to grow facial hair. Even though they were still minors, they were able to have their healthy breasts surgically removed to give them the flat-chested appearance of males. Your daughter is fascinated and watches numerous videos. At school, her teacher tells the class that what makes you a boy or a girl is not determined by your body, but how you feel inside. In the school library, Emma chooses a book about a girl who transitions to a boy. She uses an app on her phone to see what she might look like when she transitions. One day, Emma says to her teacher, "I think I'm a boy." Her teacher exclaims, "That's wonderful. What would you like your new name to be?" "I am Eric," your daughter replies. "That's a nice name, Eric," says her teacher. "Do your parents know that you are a boy?" "No," she replies. "I'm nervous to tell them." At the end of the school year, you flip through your daughter's yearbook and you see her picture with the name Eric under it. You're confused. You think that the school made a mistake, but they did not. You later learn that the school's failure to tell you about your child's social transition was intentional. My name is Carolyn Burjoski, and I was an elementary teacher with the Waterloo Region District School Board for more than 20 years. On January 17th, I spoke at the Board of Trustees meeting to address my concerns about the age appropriateness of sexual content in children's books in elementary school libraries. Less than 4 minutes into my presentation, the board chair, Scott Piektowski, halted my presentation, suggesting that I had violated the Ontario Human Rights Code. After a vote on the issue by the board, the chair's decision was upheld, and I was ejected from the meeting, and I was not permitted to finish my presentation. The next morning, Waterloo Region District School Board Human Resources called to inform me that I was forbidden from returning to my classroom and contacting my colleagues. I was also informed that the board had hired an outside firm to conduct an investigation of a complaint made by the board involving the comments I had made at the meeting. The board removed the meeting video from its website so people could not hear from themselves what I actually said. The board and its chair took to social media, radio, and television to defend their actions and to characterize my statements as hateful, harmful, and transphobic. That was not a good week. I am now suing the board for defamation, and I have launched a judicial review of the board's decision to halt my presentation. I feel that the board and its chair engaged in this course of action to silence a delegation that was expressing concerns that it did not want to hear. By pursuing these legal actions, I hope to deter future school boards from trying to intimidate, silence, and punish and slander parents and teachers whose diverse opinions may be inconsistent with the school's ideology. I believe that what happened to me shows how far our school board has fallen from its former emphasis on critical thinking, open discussion, collaboration, academic excellence, and democratic values. It is essential that we work together to reform this school board, which must begin with recovering our democratic right to speak without fear of intimidation. A local resident summarized these ideas well in an email that she sent me. The concerns you raise about the 2 library books are ones that I share. I agree with you totally that infertility and other consequences of medical transition shouldn't be treated glibly, and that labeling children not yet experiencing sexual attraction as asexual is ill-advised, to put it mildly. It was your point about how little girls might feel reading Rick that resonated most strongly with me. Girls already learn so young that they are first and foremost objects to be looked at by boys and men in this world. I hate that they might first be exposed to that idea in their own school library. Even if I didn't share your concerns about these books, though, I hope that I would still support your right to speak and a public forum like a school trustee meeting. I hope that the scrutiny that Mr. Pietkowski and the trustees are now facing prompts some reflection on their part about the value of free speech and free thought, especially where it concerns what we are teaching our children in public schools. Many other Canadian parents have been expressing their concerns to school boards across the country. In June, Pierre Barnes, a parent from British Columbia, sent an email blast to school trustees across Canada. His email included examples of the pornographic images that his child had been exposed to in the school library. I do apologize for this picture, but you're adults, and this is in kids' schools. And I do apologize. I meant to say if people on the live stream should take their children out of the room if they're watching this. But there's a lot more, and there's more that's worse. In ironic turn of event, and you can look at them at the back table if you like later. In an ironic turn of events, one of these school board trustees was so shocked by these images that she sent an internal message to her board suggesting that the police investigate this dad for email that's illegal. This trustee was unaware that the pornographic images she wanted to report to the police were actually screenshots from books that were in multiple school libraries of her own board. If this trustee was ready to call the police to protect adults from pornographic materials, I question why she would not have acted to have these materials removed from the schools to protect children. Just as an aside, the Ontario College of Teachers was doing training on just this sort of thing, like the sexualization of our children and grooming. And this is reportable, what we're seeing in these books. It's reportable, and we have a duty to report. Had I been allowed to continue my presentation to the trustees on January 17th, I would have shared some of the school board's new resources for teachers. For example, the early years document, Changing How We Talk About Gender, advises teachers to tell children, many boys have penises, and some others do too. Many girls have vulvas, and some others do too. You get to decide if you're a boy, girl, both, or something in between. And if you look at the bottom of that screenshot, you'll see WRDSB, Transgender Week of Awareness. Those were sent to us. So teachers are getting these materials, and that will filter down to the classroom. It is my view that telling all children that they can choose if they are a boy or a girl is a radical and unscientific message that is likely to confuse them. For example, an 11-year-old girl whom I know attended a gender and stereotype class at her Waterloo Region Middle School. This event was presented by a third-party organization, which is a group from outside of the school that comes in to speak to kids. By the end of the lesson, this young girl began to think that becoming a boy was a choice that she could make. She later reflected on what she had learned that day by telling her friend, I didn't realize until today that I could be a boy. It's important to note that this student had never questioned her girlness until she attended school that day. These ideas about gender are also being taught to much younger children by teachers who appear to be acting more as activists and who are seeking to inculcate these messages in teachable moments, even though gender is not in the curriculum for that grade. In fact, the 6-year-old daughter of a woman in Ottawa came home from school and told her mother what she learned that day. Her grade 1 teacher had told the class that girls and boys aren't real. This little girl was very upset to learn that she wasn't real. I'm worried that in an attempt to support a small group of gender-questioning students, we might be destabilizing the identities of many students who would never have questioned their identities as boys or girls. Young children have no concept of how the interior of their bodies work. We don't teach them about the reproductive system until grade 5. So young children think that hair, clothing, and activity choices are what make you a boy or a girl. They don't know what's inside the body. I believe that telling young children that they can choose to be a boy or a girl before they can understand how their bodies work is developmentally inappropriate, misleading, and unscientific. I'm concerned that schools might be reinforcing stereotypes instead of freeing children from them. Children may be internalizing this message: if I don't conform to gender stereotypes of girls who like dresses and boys who like sports, I might actually be the opposite sex. Or if I don't like how my body is changing at puberty, I can probably stop that with some medicine. In fact, a recent Newsweek article raises questions about the explosion in adolescent girls transitioning, receiving life-altering mastectomies and hysterectomies on healthy organs. This Newsweek article states, and I'm going to quote for a bit out of this article, within the last decade, there has been a meteoric increase of young people rejecting their bodies and identifying as the opposite sex. The vast majority of these youths are female. If this astronomical rise in gender dysphoria were due to greater awareness and acceptance of people who feel distressed by their sex, we would see similar increases across all demographics, including middle-aged women. But that is not happening. We therefore need to seriously consider what if gender dysphoria, particularly among impressionable young girls, is increasing due to social reasons. Many of the girls rejecting their bodies had no previous history of feeling distressed about their biological sex and only started presenting gender dysphoria after a friend came out as trans or after being exposed to the idea in an online forum. The article also reveals that other countries are rethinking this pathway to youth medicalization. Progressive countries such as Sweden, Finland, Belgium, and the UK are pulling back from the fast path of affirmation to medicalization. The article continues, Swedish authorities decided last year to bar the use of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones on most minors, arguing that there was insufficient evidence to back up the treatment. Finland took similar steps earlier, saying psychotherapy should be pursued before prescribing those drugs to children. In Canada, on the other hand, there has been relatively little public debate about treatment approaches. In the UK, the Tavistock Gender Clinic was recently shut down amidst controversy that it was not factoring other issues into patient care. In fact, children on the autism spectrum accounted for 1/3 of the patients at this clinic. Dr. Joey Bonifacio, medical director of Sick Kids Hospital Gender Clinic in Toronto and a former researcher for Trans Youth Can, is now calling for more caution here in Canada. He states, the changes, and this is a quote from him, the changes that have occurred in Sweden, Finland, and now the UK should give us food for thought. Let's evaluate what's going on here. This doctor, who is an expert at the heart of gender medicine in Canada, is publicly questioning some of their own practices. He is telling us to slow down. Countries around the world are discussing this so they can make the best decisions for children. Why aren't we allowed to talk about this here in Canada? As an aside, I was listening to a podcast with Tara Henley last night, and she was that CBC reporter who left CBC, and then she wrote a letter in her why she was leaving the CBC, and it went viral. And then she was talking about being able to speak and to do stories that were dear to her heart or that she thought were interesting. And she was talking about how what the problem is, that there's no viewpoint diversity really allowed at the CBC. So this is, we haven't seen an article yet about what I just said from CBC at all. And Tara was just explaining, like, that's why she left the CBC. We need to hear what's going on in other parts of the country or in other parts of the world. I also observe that leaders are using what I feel is crafty and confusing language choices on this topic. For example, in the student census the previous spring, I had to explain this question to my English language learners who are in grade 5. Do you identify as a girl, gender fluid, gender nonconforming, gender queer, intersex, boy, non-binary, trans, two-spirit, or a gender not listed above? It was a tough class that day. I noticed immediately that the question did not ask, are you a girl? It asked, do you identify as a girl? This seems like a deliberate choice of words that could plant the idea in a child's head that their bodies do not determine whether they are a boy or a girl. I wonder what could motivate the equity department to phrase the question in that way. A year later, the director noted the results of that same survey, which found that 24% of the student population identified as 2S LGBTQIA+. Yes, I practiced that. In my opinion, language like this might be actively pushing children to question their gender identity. I believe that we should be more cautious because studies suggest that most children who are socially transitioned become locked into that identity and go on to seek future medical intervention, while the majority of children who are not socially transitioned grow out of their gender discomfort after going through a natural puberty. I am worried that some of the new books in our libraries might influence children to make that hasty decision. For example, the book Seeing Gender states, children should be believed when they state that they are a gender other than the sex they were assigned at birth. And they should be believed if they want to change their gender the next day. This book presents the idea that there is no need to discuss these ideas with your parents before you declare your new gender identity, no benefit in waiting to be sure or researching future consequences before making this decision. The message to kids seems to be full speed ahead. I'm worried that this initial step of social transition might be an on-ramp to a highway, carrying children into a future of very serious medical interventions and possible regret. DTrans Reddit includes the stories of young people who regret their hasty decisions to transition. When I prepared this slide for my presentation in January, DTrans Reddit had 24,000 members. 6 months later, this site supporting detransitioning young people has now grown to 39,000 members. I urge you to read their stories. At the beginning of my talk tonight, I told a story about Emma's transition to Eric. You may have wondered why the teacher didn't tell the parents that everyone at school was reinforcing Emma's boy identity. The answer is that the teacher was following Board Policy 1235, which states a school should never disclose a student's gender status to parents without the student's explicit prior consent. In practice, this means that teachers must refer to children by their new name and pronoun when at school, even if they are very young, but then switch back to the original name and pronoun when communicating with parents. I feel that this policy puts teachers in an ethical dilemma of having to lie to a parent or disobey the school board's directive. It also excludes parents from their own role of providing loving guidance to their child on a very complex and serious topic. I believe that this policy is also an outrageous breach of parental rights. When school boards assume the role of parent to our children and staff provide support for transitioning a child behind a parent's back, I believe we are seeing the modern echoes of past practices where governments interfered with families. How did we get here? When I asked an equity officer how this policy of not informing parents was developed, I was told that a diverse group from the transgender community was consulted. And it made me wonder how a committee that is populated by people from the same identity group can be considered diverse, inclusive, and equitable. Rather, it appears to be an exclusive group that influenced an important policy without the benefit of oppositional feedback. If this committee had included a trans person, a Muslim imam, a black conservative Christian, a detransitioned youth, and a feminist, that would be a more diverse and inclusive group. A more varied group of thinkers expressing their concerns to committees would ensure that blind spots are noticed, parents are consulted, unintended consequences are avoided, and sound decisions are made. The makeup of this committee is evidence that our school board is not including diverse thinkers when decisions are being made. And that's why we need a change of leadership. A recent poll from the region asked residents this question: how do you feel the WRDSB delivers on its responsibilities? 55% of the respondents said poorly or very poorly. This chart demonstrates Waterloo Region District School Board's failing grade at meeting the expectations of parents and students. My purpose in speaking on January 17th and today is simply to make WRDSB parents aware of the concerns of an experienced teacher. I believe we need an immediate reform of the school board so that children can be educated in a politically and ideologically neutral environment that focuses on academic excellence. I hope that this community now better understands why we should pay attention to what is going on in our schools and are more motivated to exercise their voices and their votes. On October 24th, we can elect trustees who operate in a more transparent, responsive, and democratic manner. I urge you to do your research and vote for trustees who will not intimidate the people with misapplied codes, nor slander those who come forward with reasonable concerns. Instead, vote for trustees who welcome the input of parents and who aim to refocus our schools to benefit children. Use these helpful websites to find trustees who align with your values. Vote for change so our kids can succeed. Waterloo Region, we can do this together.
Thank you, Carolyn, for that presentation tonight and for your bravery that you've shown up to this point. I'm going to ask Carolyn to come back here to the front with me. And I'm also going to ask David to join us on the stage. We've arrived to the portion of our evening where we'll have some time for questions and answers. if a few of our volunteers could bring the question forms to the front, that would be appreciated.
I believe at this time people are just gathering up the questions. If you've had a moment to write them out, and they're going to collect them from you. Thank you again, everyone, for showing up tonight. Even with the technical difficulties with the live stream, everybody has just been in such great spirits. It's been wonderful to have you here.
Why are you handing the mic to me?
I always like to share.
You can sing a song, can't you?
I was going to sing, well, I was thinking about singing.
I sang a song earlier when we were doing the sound check.
I'm hoping that just by show of hands, did you hear something that you didn't know this evening? Just by show of hands. And given that anger is a great motivator, did you hear anything that made you angry? Now, as we're waiting for the questions to come up to the front, I'd remind you that you are able to make change. There are the two websites that were up when Carolyn was finishing her presentation. And voteagainstwoke.ca is if you are outside of Waterloo Region. And if you are in Waterloo Region, knowyourwrdsbtrustees.ca. You can go there and you can get the information you need to show the trustees that are going to represent your beliefs and values. It looks like we have some questions up here now.
Okay. So here, you look at those.
Okay.
Oh. Okay. Somebody asked, I'm just wondering if the union supported you back in January. The answer is no. The person who was supposed to be supporting me was actually tweeting in support of the board's decision that night. And yeah, so after all those years of paying union dues, I had to pay for a lawyer and to support me. And I actually would not have been able to do that if I were not retired. It's like I retired about 2 weeks later. I had to cut I was planning to stay on as an occasional teacher, but I had to cut my ties there because they were out for me, and I wasn't going to be working as an OT anyway. But if I had stayed on, then you can't get a lawyer if you're staying on. You have to have the union represent you. So I'd have been in a really vulnerable position if I was expecting that particular union rep to be supporting me when he's very much happy with the board shutting me down. So we can see that this problem is across the institutions. It's in the education system. It's in the union for sure. So.
Great. Thank you. I've got a question here that says municipal elections are one thing, but how do we get the Ministry of Education to stand up? Well, that's a great question because I've been very disappointed with what I've seen from Doug Ford's government related to all of this that's happening in our school boards. In fact, I think in Waterloo Region, when our Minister of Education was here, the only thing he said was, well, people can vote. So he kind of abdicated his authority there. Here's what worries me, just to look at the larger provincial picture. Just prior to the provincial election, there was a bill that came forward, Bill 67, and it was the anti-racism bill. It was put forward by the NDP. Laura May Lindo, who is a representative from Waterloo Region, NDP rep from Waterloo Region, actually put it forward. And it was everything that you would not want to see in terms of instruction on race. It was anti-racism and critical race theory writ large. What was troubling was that the Ford government, none of the Ford MPPs voted against it. And now that a very similar bill, Bill 16, is coming forward. And as it stands now, trustees, you elect these trustees in, there's room for them to change things. But in the wake of Bill 16, if it passes, then I don't know what you can do except pull your kids out of school. So that's something, the Ministry of Education, why don't they stand up? Either they believe this stuff or they're cowards. And either way, I guess there's another election there that we have to vote people out, right? So that's, why don't they stand up to it? I don't know. I don't know.
I have one here. As an ESL teacher, what is your opinion of critical race theory or anti-racism education? I could go on and on about that. So I think it's really important to understand that Martin Luther King, this whole thing goes against what Martin Luther King was saying, as David had said. And I had the best seat in the house about kids who were coming from different countries. You know, most of my students had brown skin. I mean, what I used to do about racism is I say, let's all put our hand in the middle there, and I put a piece of paper that's white and a piece of paper that's black, you know, and say, who here is white? Nobody was white. My skin's not white. Look at these cards. They're like, my skin's not white. And then
I'm pretty close.
Yeah. And then, you know, the kids who had browner skin, you know, they weren't black either. There was not a black, nobody matched the black paper. And then I just said, like, we are all different shades of brown. That's what we are. We have just different skin pigment. And I prefer that way of looking at things because it draws what we are, it puts us together, right? It builds unity. We're kind of the same, right? Some people have different colored hair, different colored eyes, different colored skin. And so our kids came from places of war and they had academic gaps. And these kids came, sometimes they'd never been to school. Plus they were traumatized, had kids that had been bombed. And those kids wanted to learn. And they did learn. If you give them what they need next and you believe in them, they succeed. So we had kids who had come in grade 4 and never been to school before, graduate from Conestoga College because they believed in themselves. And I helped them to believe in themselves. I didn't say, poor you, you're brown, you've been in a war. Poor you. That poor you doesn't help. And that's what critical race theory does. It enfeebles people. It doesn't help. Oh, wait. I should stop because
no, that's good.
My topic.
And you know, I'll put on my sociologist hat just for a moment, and I'll say that there's really good evidence that the values that a particular person holds, whether they are a person of color or a white person, it really does allow them to succeed in life or not. And it's very interesting. I mean, there's a lot of data out of the U.S. that shows that people of color, immigrant families who are also visible minorities, people of color, those who have strong families, mom and dad at home, or they actually encourage their kids to work hard and they will be with them for homework. These are the kind of variables that really do matter. But also within the family, there's the family narrative that you can succeed. You can succeed. And that makes a huge difference. And so Pew Research Council out of the U.S., they did a survey of immigrants to the U.S., and they wanted to see, do you think that the society is stacked against you, or do you think that, that you can succeed in America? Well, there was a direct correlation between those immigrants who believed they could succeed in America and those that did, regardless of their skin color. And so in psychological theory, we talk about stereotype threat. And stereotype threat is this notion that if you are continually told that you will underperform, that the deck is stacked against you, it'll happen. It'll happen. So we've got to stop doing this Jedi mind trick on students in our classes.
I'm going to hand you this one because it's about how to vote, but read it and think about it first. I just want to say something else. I've taken the training, the anti-racism training. I've taken a couple sessions of it, and basically they say that our whole society is white supremacist, everything, and we have to cut it all down and start all over again. So here's an example of exactly what David said. They're packaging something up, but then when you actually open it and see what it is, it's nonsense. So here's an example. The instructor said that like being on time is white supremacist, like being punctual, we're punctual. So she said that's all white supremacy comes from those terrible Brits or whatever it is. And then she said, and be on time at the end of the session. And I want you all to be on time for the next session. I wanted to start promptly at 7. So if you believe that it's white supremacist to be on time, why don't you just tell people to show up anytime you want, through in the night or the day, and just to text you, and you will all, well, that, it's nonsense. And the other thing is that I'm concerned about our society for lots of different reasons, but this whole grouping of people, like they're creating these identity groups, and they made a Muslim identity group, and I work with Muslims. I'm known in the Muslim community. I love the Muslim people. Most of my students were Muslims. I asked to be on that identity group so I could listen. I didn't want to talk. And they said, no, I couldn't be because I'm not Muslim. And that's what they're doing. They're creating these groups. And if you want to solve racism, you mix people together. You watch the kids out on the playground. They're mixing, and they're not even noticing that they have different skin colors. They don't care what people are wearing as headdress. They are just playing like kids. So what we need to do is mix people groups, not segregate people groups.
I'm just looking at the time. Maybe we'll do one more question each, and then we'll release everybody so that you can have some more snacks at the back, and the people who are watching on the live stream, they can tuck their kids into bed, or they can go watch Netflix, or whatever people do. I have a question here that wants to know, can I just briefly talk about some of the studies that actually showed that white privilege and anti-racism does harm? So again, I'd commend people, take a look at the YouTube video of that actual presentation that I did before the board, but I can tell you, so there was a study that was done out of, I believe it was the University of Michigan. They wanted to see how the topic of white privilege would affect online discussions. What they found was that as soon as they introduced the topic of white privilege, people stopped talking to each other. They began dividing by race. Formerly, whites who were very favorable towards race and racial integration and racial tolerance, they became less so. And it just shut down conversation overall. Another study that was done, and this was in the Journal of, I think, Experimental Psychology, but again, you can check out the video for this, from 2019. What they looked at was what actually happens when people do white privilege studies. So they did a large sample, and they looked at before and after. And what they found was that white privilege studies did nothing to make people more sympathetic to poor blacks. It didn't make them any less racist. But what it did do was it made them more hostile toward poor whites. The assumption was that, well, you're white, you have privilege. If you're poor, then you must be really bad. And so teaching white privilege does make people more prejudiced toward poor whites. There was other work done by a psychologist at Princeton. She did a meta-analysis. This is the last one I'll talk about. She did a meta-analysis to look at all, there were over 400 studies of diversity training, including anti-racist instruction. And what she found was the net effect of that instruction on people's ability to be racist or not was 0. After, it was either 400 or 600 studies that she did the meta-analysis on. So that's what we're seeing in our schools. It's being promoted as this wonderful treatment that will do something, and it absolutely doesn't do it, but it can make things worse.
Okay, there's just one more here, and we got one from the live stream. It's a question from the live stream, so I'm pretty
Fantastic.
excited. Okay, what other websites do you recommend for parents concerned about the indoctrination in schools? And off the top of my head, Canadian Gender Report. Canadian Gender Report has lots of research on there and links to other things too. And then we're going to put some on. Hey, there's this website called canceledteacher.com. Yeah, you could try that one too. And we're going to put some more links on there as well.
And I think that just so we can make sure everybody gets out on time, is that good for you?
Yeah.
That's good. We're going to have our MC come up and deliver the final address. Thanks, everybody, by the way.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And thank you, live stream, for listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of our organizers and our presenters tonight, we want to say a big thank you to all of you for making it out here and making it on the live stream as well. And thank you for joining us at Education at the Crossroads. Have a safe night.
Thank you to our tech people. They do the magic.